Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your patience and the depth to the degree you're answering our questions. I have two things I want to just touch on. The one with regard to the Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force. I actually have a constituent who serves on it, and I was pleased to see that the recommendations have come out. Without getting into what the recommendations say, could you speak to whether or not they have any teeth? Was there, when the governor put together this task force, any language that would say, and you will adopt, or we will get into?
Let me answer it as succinctly as I can, because I think I stated this on the record during the task force meeting when we had some public inquiry in terms of this. Our mission was to make recommendations up to the governor in terms of best practices for the natural gas industry and different things in terms of siting, work development, things of that nature. But as with any task force that is done, it's recommendations up to. So that, to me, is the first step. And it's working with the General Assembly, or, if there's already general authority under an agency's statute that they can implement some changes, I think generally you can do that. Some of the recommendations for the work group that I was on in terms of gas line safety and integrity, one of our recommendations was to bring the one-call program under the jurisdiction of the PUC. Currently, that program is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Labor and Industry. So with that program, we have of the number of calls that come in every year, and Commissioner Coleman would know that number a lot better than I, but I do know about 80% of those calls are for entities that we regulate. So with that, we have been working with the General Assembly, or I say Commissioner Coleman has been working with the General Assembly over the past few years to try to enact legislation that would put that program under our jurisdiction. So in terms of that recommendation, and that was one of the recommendations that received some of the highest number of votes in terms of a high number recommendation to the governor.
Thank you, because I was going to segue my next question, and you just did it for me, into that program. What is the cause of the delay? Why isn't that going through? That meaning the transfer from L&I?
I'll turn it over to Commissioner Coleman.
Excuse me, I think I just got the answer to my question.
What was that? Oh.
The chairman said he hasn't moved the bill.
Well, if I may just take a quick moment on that, I don't know that Chairman Gottschall has to take 100% of the load on this. It's a complicated issue, and there are a variety of interests involved in this discussion. And there are some pieces of this that we're bullish on, and one of them is an exemption issue. There is an exemption that exists in the current law that has an impact on the Class 1 gathering lines that we've talked a lot about today. And in the law presently, those lines are not obligated to be part of the one-call system. And this commission is very bullish on that, to say that exemption has to go. In the
So
state
they would, excuse me, go ahead.
Well, in the state of Pennsylvania and what's going on with the extension of natural gas lines throughout the state, this is becoming more and more of an issue. And it's become such an issue that we have seen a fatality late last year in Armstrong County as a result of this exemption in the law. And it's precisely because of this exemption in the law that a excavator hit a Class 1 line that was not marked in the field. The rest of the site was marked. It was all cleared for one call. This line is not required to be marked. And the excavator hit the line, it imploded, and it burned 70% of his body, and unfortunately he's passed away. So we are bullish on this piece, and we are up against a trade group that is just as bullish that they don't want to see this exemption go from the law.
And, okay, you're giving me some things to digest. Obviously, you're an expert on this. I am not, but I am familiar with some contractors who actually knew the gentleman who passed away. Mm-hmm. So this is, it's really very important to them, especially knowing that they have loved ones and employees out in the fields. with unmarked lines. Are these typically legacy lines, and that's the reason they're not marked, or it's just an exemption across the board?
Yeah, this is an exemption across the board, and this is one of the pieces where we have significant disagreement. The trade group has suggested that these are what they call low consequence lines. And
Try saying that to the family of the deceased.
I couldn't agree more. This is not a low consequence line. This is not a legacy line. This is a line that was recently put in the ground. And Vice Chairman Place can speak to this issue as well, but this is a tragedy. And this is like excavator roulette in the field, where these lines are becoming more and more plentiful across Pennsylvania, and they are not required by law to be marked in the field. And I would not want to be on a piece of equipment doing any excavation in Pennsylvania not knowing what's beneath me. And that's what we're doing with excavators.
And look, even just getting cable or a gas line put at my mom's home, I did the one call, all of that out. I recognize the importance no matter what it is, but especially, a water line can't necessarily kill you. These can. Would it be under your jurisdiction then, as you're looking at these, assuming the chairman moves the bill, and assuming the bill moves forward, would the PUC then have the authority, or I guess I'll back off the authority, but would you support utility companies having to pay contractors for standby times when their lines get damaged because of they're not marked properly or they're marked 18 inches or more off the center point?
Yeah, this is a great point, and thank you for the question. This has been part of the over 4.5 years worth of negotiations with the parties of interest that I mentioned on the onset of my comments. We've had extensive discussions with the Excavator Trade Association, and part of that negotiation was to say, look, we understand and appreciate that you mobilize equipment, you put it onto the site, and you may find when you're ready to excavate that the site is not marked or not properly marked. The first response has got to be about safety. And what we believe is that if that is the case, the obligation of that excavator is to have to call back to one call to say, we're on site, we're ready to go, and this site either is not marked or not marked properly. There's a 3-hour window. The facility owner is then contacted again, and they have 2 hours. So just to be sure here that there's not going to be a dispute as to what the minute was that we called, there is a 1-hour window here to give a little bit of grace on both ends of this. So the facility owner has 2 hours to get back into the field and to mark that facility or to communicate with that contractor to let them know that there is no consequence or to give them guidance on where their facilities are in the field. So we provided that I guess negotiation is probably the best way to describe it, with the trade association saying we believe that this is the best way to approach this, and that should this bill become law and that enforcement does come to the commission, we made a commitment that we would go back after we had some data to see if in fact we were reducing this issue for excavators. We truly understand what the issue is. But we believe that this is really an issue of enforcement. And the better the enforcement, the better the chances are that we're going to reduce those costs for idle time in the field for excavators. So we have agreement. There is a letter from the Trade Association that was shared with each of the oversight chairs to let them know that the Trade Association and the Commission has agreed to this, and that language is in the proposed legislation at this point.
Thank you. And as I as I learn more about this, I now know with whom I can consult. Thanks.
And sorry, if I may jump in just for 30 seconds, if you don't mind. There's an additional question here, is that Class 1 lines are non-jurisdictional, whether it's PHMSA, the federal side, or the state PUC. So outside of this question of the PA1 call system, which you've just debated, one of the recommendations, the strong recommendations that came out of the governor's recent task force was to ensure that there becomes jurisdiction for the Class 1 lines. That would require either PHMSA rulemaking, which they've been working on for some time, or efforts by legislative effort to bring that into become jurisdiction under the PUC.
And I believe there's bills in both chambers for that as well.
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.